Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where the past lingers quietly in stone and shadow. You wander up to a medieval castle, its towering walls rising like the ribs of some ancient sleeping beast. The air is cool and carries the faint scent of moss and centuries-old wood, a combination that somehow makes your skin tingle. You probably won't survive this. Well, not in the literal sense, but let's just say your imagination might wander into strange, slightly spooky places as we walk together. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is locally. Let's see how many night owls we have tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the castle's entrance, your footsteps echoing softly against the ancient stones. The sheer height of the walls looms over you, a reminder that this fortress has stood against wind, rain, and the march of countless armies. Scholars still argue whether certain castles were built more for show of power than actual defense. But standing here, it doesn't really matter. You can feel the weight of history pressing gently on your shoulders. You run a hand along the rough stone, and it feels impossibly cold. Tiny flecks of moss cling stubbornly in the crevices, a testament to the quiet resilience of nature over human ambition. Oddly enough, you notice small scratches etched into the stone. Perhaps a knight sharpening his sword centuries ago. Or maybe some bored apprentice leaving a secret mark. Imagine the stories these walls could tell if they had voices of their own. You wander past a cracked archway and into what must have once been the castle's main hall. The room is enormous, a cavernous space where sunlight barely reaches the corners even at midday. You can almost hear the chatter of long-dead courtiers, the scrape of their shoes on the stone floor, the hushed gossip carried across candlelit tables. Oddly enough, the ceiling beams are carved with tiny faces, some grim, some oddly cheerful, peeking down as if they've been silently judging guests for centuries. Scholars still argue whether these faces were meant as protection against evil spirits or simply as a craftsman's mischievous whim. Your gaze drifts to the remnants of what could have been a massive fireplace. The hearth is blackened with soot, though now no fire warms the space. You imagine roaring flames casting dancing shadows across the walls, knights and ladies gathered, laughter and music filling the air. The thought makes you yawn. And that's the thing about castles, they're grand and mysterious, yet somehow comforting in their silence. You notice a faint outline of a tapestry on one wall, colors long faded but still suggesting tales of battles, banquets, and festivals. It's peculiar how these artifacts survive while so many human lives are forgotten entirely. Scholars still argue whether these tapestries were created to commemorate victories or simply to decorate barren stone walls. As you trace the shapes with your eyes, the imagery seems to shimmer slightly, as though the figures are moving just beyond your vision. Stepping carefully, you wander toward a row of narrow windows. Through the dust-coated glass, you can see the castle's courtyard, now silent and overgrown. You imagine children running through this space, knights drilling with wooden swords, merchants calling out wares from stalls. Even in its emptiness, the courtyard seems alive with echoes of the past, a ghostly reminder of days when this place was brimming with energy. A chill brushes your neck as you move along the wall. The stones here are colder, damp with condensation, and you notice small carvings etched deep into the surface. Hearts, initials, maybe even prayers. Oddly quaint in contrast to the grand architecture, these tiny marks hint at human presence on a very personal scale. Scholars still argue whether these were acts of devotion, declarations of love, or simply boredom finding its canvas. You pause in the center of the hall, close your eyes, and take a slow, deep breath. The quiet is almost tangible, punctuated only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere high above. You feel as if the castle itself is breathing, exhaling centuries of history into the cool night air. There's a sense of peace here, even in a place built for war and defense. The stones beneath your feet seem to hum with memory, vibrating with the weight of every footstep that has ever crossed them. You feel small, yet somehow connected to the continuum of lives that have moved through this fortress. And as your eyelids grow heavier, it's easy to let your imagination drift, to let the walls whisper you into a gentle, contemplative slumber. Every shadow becomes a story, every nook a secret waiting to be discovered, and every distant echo a lullaby sung by history itself. You wander a few steps further, brushing against the cold stone, and allow yourself to sink deeper into the soft, calming realization that you are a visitor in a place where time moves differently, slower, more deliberate. You let out a slow sigh and notice a small crack near the floor through which a single ray of moonlight spills in. It illuminates dust motes dancing lazily, and you can't help but smile at the quiet poetry of it. Perhaps this is what the castle has been waiting for all these years. A listener. Someone to wander, wonder, and drift gently into the past. With each measured step, you feel the weight of centuries slip off your shoulders. The cold, hard stone is strangely comforting now, grounding you, lulling your senses. You close your eyes for a moment and let the images of grand halls, whispering corridors, and carved faces fade softly into the background of your mind. Scholars still argue whether the quiet of an empty castle is lonely or sacred. But tonight, you don't need to know. You only need to feel. And as your breath deepens, you realize that in this castle, with its shadows and echoes, you've found a peaceful companion. Its silence wraps around you like a blanket, each creak and whisper another note in a gentle nocturne that sings you toward rest. The world outside, chaotic and loud, seems far away. Here, you are part of a story written in stone, one that unfolds slowly, serenely, as you drift into the calm embrace of history itself. You step closer to the castle's entrance, where the drawbridge stretches across a now empty moat, its wooden boards worn and creaking under your weight. Each plank groans in protest as you walk, a sound that echoes up the stone walls and back down again. You probably won't survive this. Well, not because the bridge is weak, but because your imagination is about to take a little tumble into the eerie unknown. The air smells faintly of wet wood and moss, mixed with the lingering scent of iron from long past battles. Scholars still argue whether drawbridges were primarily functional defenses or statements of architectural grandeur. But standing here, it doesn't really matter. You feel the tension between utility and spectacle, a reminder that medieval life was as much about appearances as it was about survival. Your hand brushes along the rope chains that hold the bridge, the metal cold and rough. Tiny rust spots glint in the weak moonlight, tiny scars from centuries of rain and wind. You imagine the countless feet that have crossed this bridge before you, knights in clanking armor, servants carrying firewood, merchants bringing goods from distant villages. Oddly, you feel connected to them, a silent participant in the castle's long story. The walls surrounding you rise sharply, and you notice the arrow slits, narrow as the eye of a needle. Through these small openings, defenders would have once watched for invaders, crossbows at the ready. You lean forward, peering through one, imagining the fear and anticipation of soldiers who had to remain vigilant day after day. Scholars still argue whether these slits were more effective than wide windows, but their presence alone gives you a sense of tense, deliberate control. A gust of wind passes through, rattling the old boards and sending a shiver down your spine. You step lightly, mindful of each creak, as if the castle itself is aware of your presence. Oddly enough, you notice tiny carvings on the underside of the bridge. Initials, symbols, maybe even a small dragon etched by someone long ago. It's a reminder that history isn't just in grand halls and towers, but in small, secret marks left by anonymous hands. You pause midway across, looking down at the shadowy moat beneath you. Once filled with water, now mostly mud and creeping plants, it hints at the passage of time and the slow decay of human constructions. You think about soldiers leaning over this edge, their armor clinking, orders shouted across the courtyard, perhaps even secrets whispered to one another. You feel a strange comfort in the continuity. These same stones have witnessed the same motions for centuries. As you reach the other side, the drawbridge swings slightly with a protesting groan, and you notice the hinges, massive ironworks, still functional despite centuries of neglect. Oddly satisfying, you run your fingers along them, imagining the ingenuity that went into crafting such simple yet enduring mechanisms. Scholars still argue whether these bridges were meant to be raised manually or with more elaborate pulley systems, but the mystery adds to the castle's character. Inside the gateway, the smell of cold stone mixes with faint traces of smoke from the castle's ancient hearths. The portcullis, long rusted and unused, hangs slightly askew above you. You imagine it sliding down with terrifying force during a siege, crushing anything foolish enough to stand in its path. Yet now it is just a silent sentinel, a reminder of power and caution that has softened over time. You wander further, letting your fingertips graze the walls, noticing chips and dents from centuries of use, and perhaps from battles you can only begin to imagine. The castle is alive in a subtle way, through texture, sound, and shadow, and you find yourself leaning into the calm that comes with understanding its rhythm. Odd little noises, wind through cracks, the flutter of a bat's wings, become part of a lullaby sung by stone and history. Stopping briefly in the gatehouse, you take in the small cells once used to hold prisoners. The air is damp, carrying a chill that seeps into your bones. You imagine the prisoners' anxious pacing, the quiet murmur of secrets shared, or the occasional despairing cry. Scholars still argue whether these cells were more for punishment or for temporary detainment, but standing here, you feel the tension, the careful balance of order and fear. Your eyes drift to the courtyard just beyond, now partially visible through the gateway. Empty, overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, it still echoes the activity of long-vanished daily life, servants running errands, children laughing, knights practicing their drills. The silence here is full, almost musical. Each sound that reaches your ears amplified by absence. You feel a calm settle over you, a gentle welcome into the world the castle has preserved. As you cross the threshold, your feet make soft echoes against the stone floor, and you notice a faint trail of moss running along the edge of the path. It reminds you of the quiet persistence of nature, reclaiming what humans leave behind, and the inevitability of time's passage. Oddly beautiful, you kneel to examine a tiny flower sprouting from a crack, thinking of all the lives that have touched this very spot. Scholars still argue whether such survival is more miraculous or inevitable, but for you, it feels like a small miracle, a whisper of life in the midst of history. You finally come to a halt in the inner courtyard, letting your eyes wander over the stone walls, the remnants of towers, and the quiet beauty of empty spaces. The drawbridge behind you groans faintly in the wind, as if sighing with relief that the day's visitors have finally moved on. You take a slow, deep breath and realize that this entrance, once a line of defense, a barrier, a threshold, has now become a portal to contemplation and calm. With your steps slowing, you lean against a sun-warmed wall and let the quiet wrap around you. The creaks, the whispers, the smell of moss, and the faint glimmers of history settle together, a gentle orchestration to lull your senses. And as you close your eyes for a brief moment, the drawbridge, the moat, and the heavy doors fade softly into your imagination, leaving only the feeling of being suspended between past and present, between adventure and rest. You move deeper into the castle, your footsteps echoing along the cold stone corridors, guided only by the flickering light of torches mounted in iron brackets. The flames dance and cast moving shadows on the walls, turning every alcove and archway into a stage for mysterious, silent performances. You probably won't survive this. Well, not because of danger, but because your mind is about to drift so far into the castle's story that you may never want to leave. Scholars still argue whether torchlight was used primarily for practical illumination, or if it was also meant to create a sense of awe, a subtle reminder of power and sophistication. Either way, the soft glow warms the chill of the stone walls, and you feel almost embraced by the gentle flicker. The heat is mild, but enough to make you notice the faint smell of smoke and melted wax, mingling with the earthy aroma of centuries-old stone. As you continue, you notice how the walls seem to close in slightly, narrowing the hall and creating a sense of intimacy. Oddly, tiny carvings etched into the stone catch your eye, perhaps the initials of a forgotten servant, a sketch of a horse, or a whimsical creature. It's fascinating how such small, personal details survive, quiet witnesses to the daily life of people long gone. You pause to trace a particularly intricate symbol with your fingertip, imagining who might have left it behind and why. The floor is uneven beneath your boots, worn smooth in places by the countless footsteps of knights, messengers, and visitors over centuries. You hear the occasional creak of a loose stone under your weight and wonder if it's always been this way or if the castle itself is groaning in acknowledgement of your presence. Each step becomes meditative, a rhythm that lulls you into a slower pace, almost in tune with the castle's quiet heartbeat. You pass an archway leading to what was likely a grand hall. Though empty now, you can envision the long tables, the ornate banners hanging from the walls, and the laughter of feasts long past. The stone floor carries a subtle resonance, and when you speak softly, your voice seems to mingle with echoes of voices that have not spoken for centuries. Scholars still argue whether these halls were primarily ceremonial or functional for large gatherings, but the lingering atmosphere suggests both. The shadows twist and stretch along the walls as your torch flickers. Oddly, you think you see shapes in the darkness. A knight standing silently, a servant passing with a tray, a minstrel tuning a lute. None of them are real, of course, but your imagination fills the space, and that is part of the castle's charm. The interplay of light and shadow creates an almost hypnotic effect, coaxing your mind toward calm reflection. A faint breeze drifts down the corridor, carrying with it a whiff of damp stone and the faintest hint of something sweet, perhaps a remnant of dried herbs once used to scent the halls. You breathe it in, savoring the subtle aroma, and let the sensation sink into your body. Odd details like this, the lingering scent of forgotten meals or the slight chill of a draft, make the castle feel more alive than its empty stone might suggest. Scholars still argue whether such sensory remnants are significant or simply coincidental, but for you, they are an anchor in the immersive world of the castle. You notice high ceilings adorned with carved wooden beams. Each beam bears the scars of time, cracks, chips, and perhaps a small carving here and there left by a carpenter long gone. The craftsmanship is intricate, functional, and beautiful all at once. You reach out, running your hand along the rough wood, imagining the hands that shaped it, the stories they carried, and the silent prayers they whispered as they worked. The tactile sensation is grounding, connecting you directly to the people of the past. The corridor narrows slightly as you approach a spiral staircase leading upward. The torchlight flickers more intensely here, sending dancing shadows up the curved walls. You pause, noticing the worn steps, each one smoothed by centuries of footfalls. Oddly, tiny scratches and chips in the stone seem almost like a secret code left for future wanderers to decipher. Scholars still argue whether these marks were intentional, accidents, or simply the result of time, but they add layers to your experience, prompting curiosity and wonder. You glance upward, imagining the tower at the top and the view it must offer over the surrounding lands. The anticipation heightens your senses. Every creak, every draft of air, every flicker of flame feels amplified, drawing you deeper into the castle's rhythm. Your breath slows, and you realize that the combination of quiet, light, and space is working like a gentle lullaby, coaxing your mind to wander freely while your body remains at ease. A shadow crosses the wall in the shape of a doorway you pass. You squint, trying to determine if it's real or a trick of the flickering torch. Oddly, you feel neither fear nor surprise, only a soft curiosity. The castle has a way of making even ordinary things feel extraordinary, and you welcome the quiet sense of wonder that settles over you. Scholars still argue whether such sensory effects were intended by the original builders, but their unintended impact on visitors centuries later is undeniable. You step lightly along the corridor, savoring the echoes of your footsteps and the faint hum of the castle's stone bones settling around you. Each moment feels suspended in time, as though the castle itself is breathing in sync with you. The torch's flickering light dances across the carvings and worn surfaces, inviting your mind to explore histories long forgotten. You feel simultaneously small and part of something much larger than yourself, a witness to centuries of quiet life within these walls. Finally, you reach a chamber where the light spills across an arched window. Dust motes float lazily in the beams, and you watch as the shapes shimmer and twist. You realize that this is more than architecture. It's a canvas for imagination, a space where history and creativity merge. Oddly, the flickering light and shadows feel like a private performance, crafted just for you. Scholars still argue whether the aesthetic choices of medieval builders were deliberate or coincidental, but their effect on your senses this evening are profound. As you linger in the chamber, you take a slow, deep breath, letting the scents, sights, and sounds wash over you. The torch's warmth, the stone's coolness, the shadow's dance, and the whispers of centuries long past converge into a gentle, calming rhythm. Your mind drifts, guided by the interplay of light, shadow, and sound, and you feel the soft pull of drowsiness begin to settle in. The corridor, the torches, and the carvings fade softly from your focus, leaving only a quiet sense of wonder and peace. You step into the great hall, where the ghosts of forgotten feasts seem to linger in the air. Long tables, now empty and coated with a thin layer of dust, stretch before you like silent witnesses to centuries of revelry and ceremony. You probably won't survive this, at least not without imagining the clatter of silverware and the echoes of laughter that once filled this vast space. The fireplace dominates one wall, its hearth blackened from fires long extinguished. You imagine the flames licking the stone, casting dancing shadows over the walls and the faces of nobles and servants alike. Scholars still argue whether such halls were primarily designed to impress visiting dignitaries or simply to accommodate large gatherings of the castle's own inhabitants. But standing here, the purpose feels both ceremonial and intimate. As you wander along the hall, your eyes catch remnants of tapestries hanging crookedly on the walls. Faded threads hint at battles, hunts, and grand ceremonies. Oddly, some details seem almost mischievous. Tiny animals or figures hidden in the weaving that might have amused the weavers or served as secret messages to those in the know. You trace the patterns with your eyes, letting your imagination fill in the colors and movement that time has erased. The air smells faintly of smoke and aged wood, mixed with the lingering aroma of dried herbs that once scented the hall. You take a slow breath and notice how the space feels alive, despite its emptiness. Odd details like a slightly tilted chair or a chip in the stone floor suggest moments frozen in time. Scholars still argue whether such imperfections were intentional design choices or simple evidence of centuries of use, but for you, they add charm and realism. Above, the wooden beams of the ceiling are carved with intricate patterns, geometric shapes, floral designs, and perhaps a few hidden faces. You tilt your head back, letting your fingers brush along a low-hanging beam, imagining the craftsman who spent hours shaping and carving each detail. Oddly, the effort seems both monumental and intimate, a reminder of human creativity enduring across centuries. Your gaze falls upon the massive doors at the far end of the hall, their iron hinges rusted yet still holding firm. You push one gently, listening to the soft groan it makes, a sound that resonates through the empty hall like a whispered warning. You imagine these doors once held fast against invaders, only to be flung open in celebration or decree. Scholars still argue whether the design prioritized security or grandeur, but standing here, you feel the balance of both. You wander closer to the center of the hall, imagining the tables once laden with roasted meats, bread, and wine. Oddly, you notice the faint outline of footprints in the dust, perhaps left by a curious cat, or maybe, in your imagination, the ghost of a servant tidying the space long ago. Each small detail draws you further into the hall's story, making it feel personal, almost intimate, despite its massive scale. The windows along one wall are tall and narrow, their glass long since cracked or missing entirely. Moonlight streams in, casting slivers of light across the floor. You watch as shadows stretch and twist, creating shapes that seem alive. Scholars still argue whether these windows were meant primarily for light, decoration, or defense. But tonight, they serve a different purpose, a gentle, hypnotic dance for your senses. You pause near the hearth and imagine the crackling of the fire long ago, the flicker illuminating faces with a golden glow. The room would have been filled with voices, music, and the clinking of glasses. Oddly, the contrast between that lively scene and the current silence feels comforting, a reminder of life's impermanence and the beauty in quiet reflection. Scholars still argue whether the layout of these halls encouraged social hierarchy or communal participation, but the space feels both orderly and inviting to you now. As you wander to the edge of the hall, you notice a set of steps leading up to a dais where a throne or chair once stood. You imagine the nobles presiding over events, their presence commanding attention. Oddly, the worn stone underfoot suggests that even in power, these figures were subject to the same passage of time, their footsteps echoing alongside those of countless others. Scholars still argue whether the dais symbolized authority or ritualistic significance, but the effect is unmistakable: awe and quiet reflection. You take a deep breath and let the scale of the hall settle in around you. The shadows, the moonlight, the lingering scents, and the imagined echoes of past feasts converge into a rhythm that is calming, even mesmerizing. Each detail, from the carved beams above to the worn floor beneath, tells a story that invites your mind to wander, drift, and slowly ease into a relaxed, sleepy state. The hall is quiet now, but not empty. Every corner holds a memory, every shadow a whisper, and every beam a silent witness to centuries of life. Oddly, this emptiness is more alive than many bustling places you visited, offering a unique kind of companionship. Scholars still argue whether the essence of a castle lies in its walls or the stories they contain. But tonight, you feel both, present, absorbed, and cradled by the echoes of history. You wander to a slightly ajar side door, the light from your torch spilling across the threshold. Beyond it, you glimpse a narrow corridor leading further into the castle. Odd details, small carvings, faint scratches, and worn stones invite you to explore further, promising stories waiting in silence. Scholars still argue whether the architecture was purely practical or designed to inspire curiosity, but for you, it simply beckons you deeper into this nocturnal adventure. And as your footsteps continue softly along the stone floor, you feel the gentle pull of history and imagination weaving together into a tapestry that soothes rather than startles. The great hall, with its lingering feasts, carved beams, and whispering shadows, becomes a cradle of calm, drawing you gently toward the next chamber, the next story, the next layer of medieval mystery. You step into the castle's chapel, a small, quiet space tucked away from the grandeur of the main halls. The air here feels different, cooler, heavier, with a faint scent of aged incense lingering in the stonework. You probably won't survive this, mentally at least, because your imagination is about to wander into whispered prayers and ghostly echoes of devotion. The chapel's walls are lined with faded frescoes, depicting saints, angels, and long-forgotten religious scenes. You can almost see the figures move in the flickering torchlight, their solemn faces staring down as if evaluating your every step. Scholars still argue whether such artwork was designed to inspire piety or intimidate worshippers. But standing here, you feel a quiet reverence that needs no debate. You move closer to the altar, your footsteps echoing softly against the cold stone floor. The altar is simple now, stripped of its original fineries, but you can imagine it once adorned with candles, chalices, and offerings. Oddly, tiny scratches and chips hint at centuries of hands brushing against it, prayers whispered, perhaps even tears wiped away in private moments. Each mark feels like a secret left behind just for visitors like you. Above, the vaulted ceiling is high and ornate, the ribs of stone arching gracefully overhead. Light filters through narrow stained glass windows, though many panes are broken or missing. The remaining fragments scatter colorful patterns across the floor, painting ephemeral stories with sunlight and shadow. Scholars still argue whether the arrangement of windows was symbolic or merely decorative, but tonight it transforms the chapel into a serene kaleidoscope that guides your mind toward calm reflection. You wander along the side aisles, noticing carved pews with faint engravings. Odd details catch your eye: initials, hearts, small crosses carved by hands that are long gone. You imagine worshippers pausing here centuries ago, tracing these carvings absent-mindedly as they knelt or whispered prayers. The intimacy of these touches makes the grand space feel personal, almost as if the castle itself recognizes your presence. A faint draft moves through the chapel, carrying with it the soft rustle of tattered tapestries and the faint hum of the wind outside. You pause, letting the sound wrap around you like a gentle lullaby. Oddly, you can almost hear distant echoes of chanting, faint enough to be comforting rather than eerie. Scholars still argue whether medieval chapels were acoustically designed for such residence, but for now, the effect is magical, drawing you deeper into the castle's quiet story. The stone floor beneath your feet is uneven, worn smooth in places, rough in others. Each step feels deliberate, almost meditative. You notice tiny carvings on the walls at eye level, perhaps left by monks, servants, or visiting nobles. Odd details like these, small, intimate marks amid the grandeur, remind you that human presence persists even when centuries have passed. Scholars still argue whether such carvings were signs of devotion, rebellion, or simple boredom, but to you, they're a whispered connection across time. You stop near the altar once more, letting your eyes trace the cracked stone and the faint outlines of painted figures. The quiet is profound, only broken by the occasional creak of the castle settling or the distant call of a nightbird. Oddly, it's comforting, a reminder that silence can be just as alive as sound. Scholars still debate whether the ambiance of chapels was intended to evoke fear or peace, but your experience leans firmly toward serenity. You move toward the back of the chapel, where a small wooden door leads to what was likely a vestry. Inside, faint traces of shelves and cabinets remain, along with dust-laden remnants of old texts. Odd details, tiny symbols, faded ink, or strange scratches invite you to imagine the lives of those who once tended to the sacred space. Scholars still argue whether these rooms held purely ritual objects or also mundane tools, but tonight they feel like hidden portals to stories waiting to be discovered. A single candle flickers in a corner, its light trembling across the stone walls. You approach it, feeling the warmth against your fingers without touching, and notice how shadows stretch and sway. Oddly, the movement seems almost alive, as if the castle itself is breathing gently around you. Scholars still debate whether medieval lighting was primarily practical or symbolic, but tonight it contributes to a hypnotic, sleep-inducing rhythm. As you linger, you close your eyes for a brief moment, letting your senses absorb the scent of stone and smoke, the faint colors from broken stained glass, and the soft echo of your own breath. Oddly, you feel as though the centuries of quiet prayers and whispered secrets have pooled here, creating a calm so profound it almost hums in your ears. Scholars still argue whether spiritual energy can be felt across centuries, but your experience tonight suggests it can. Finally, you take one last slow walk down the aisle, letting your fingertips brush along the pews and walls. Every surface carries a story, every shadow holds a whisper, and every flickering flame contributes to a gentle lullaby. Oddly, it feels like the chapel itself is guiding you toward rest, each step drawing you closer to the soft, dreamlike state you've been edging toward since you entered the castle. You pause at the chapel entrance, looking back once more. The flickering torches, the faint scent of incense, and the soft echoes of history create a peaceful sanctuary in the midst of the castle. Oddly, you feel reluctant to leave, but also comforted, knowing that the quiet, sacred space has prepared your mind to wander gently, easing you closer to sleep as you continue your nocturnal journey. You step into a narrow spiral staircase, its stone steps curling upward like the inside of a seashell. The air feels cooler here, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and centuries-old dust. You probably won't survive this climb without pausing to catch your breath, but that's part of the charm, isn't it? Your hand trails along the rough wall as you ascend slowly, listening to the hollow echo of each step. The staircase is tight, just wide enough for one person at a time. You picture armored guards trudging up here, the weight of steel and chainmail clanking with each movement. Scholars still argue whether spiral staircases in castles were designed solely for defense, favoring right-handed defenders with an advantage against attackers, or whether their design was simply practical. Oddly, you notice the steps are uneven, some shallow, some steep, forcing your rhythm to change, as though the staircase itself resists easy passage. A small slit window offers a breath of fresh air. You lean toward it, peering through the narrow gap at the night sky. Stars glitter like scattered jewels, and the wind brushes your face gently. Oddly, the window is angled in such a way that you can see the courtyard below, but not much of the horizon. Perhaps intentional, perhaps accidental. Scholars still debate whether such positioning was strategic or simply the result of limited design. But the effect is mesmerizing, like a secret portal to the outside world. You continue climbing, the spiral twisting again and again until your sense of direction blurs. Each turn feels both familiar and new, like being caught in a dream that repeats itself endlessly. Oddly, you find yourself soothed by the rhythm. Step, turn, breathe. Step, turn, breathe. The monotony is strangely comforting, as if the staircase has become a slow lullaby, coaxing your body into stillness. Scholars still argue whether these staircases symbolized hierarchy, with higher rooms reserved for nobility, but to you it feels like a slow journey into another realm. Your torch flickers, throwing shadows across the stone walls. For a moment, the shapes resemble faces, elongated, distorted, watching you with faint amusement. Oddly, instead of fear, you feel a gentle companionship, as if the staircase carries memories of all who climbed it before. Scholars still debate whether castles were meant to intimidate or to protect, but here the stone feels more like a guide than a threat. Halfway up, you pause at a narrow landing. A small wooden door, its iron hinges rusted, stands slightly ajar. You push it gently, and the creak echoes down the spiral like a long sigh. Inside, you find a tiny chamber, bare except for a cracked stool and a narrow slit of a window. Oddly, the stool looks worn, its seat hollowed by use. You imagine a lonely guard stationed here, staring into the night, perhaps whispering to himself to keep the silence at bay. Scholars still argue whether such chambers were practical guard posts or merely architectural leftovers, but tonight it feels like a pocket of solitude designed just for you. Leaving the chamber, you resume your climb. The spiral tightens, the steps narrower now, until you feel almost folded into the stone. Your breathing slows, your pace steadies, and your thoughts drift into a hazy rhythm. Oddly, the higher you go, the less it feels like you're climbing upward, more like you're spiraling inward, deeper into your own thoughts. Scholars still debate whether the spiraling shape was symbolic, a journey toward enlightenment, or merely coincidence, but the effect is undeniable, hypnotic and calming. At last, you reach another small window. The view this time is broader. The courtyard sprawls below, the walls rise around you, and in the distance, a faint torchlight flickers along the battlements. Oddly, you imagine voices carried by the wind, shouts of watchmen, or perhaps faint laughter. Scholars still argue whether night watch duties were solemn or filled with camaraderie, but you let the imagined sounds blend into the night, a soft background hum against the stillness of your journey. The steps continue upward, each one worn with grooves from countless feet. You run your hand along the wall, feeling the indentations, the rough texture softened by time. Oddly, you notice small scratches etched into the stone. Symbols, initials, perhaps idle marks left by bored guards. Scholars still argue whether these were personal signatures or practical notations, but to you they are whispers of humanity layered into the cold stone. As you near the top, the staircase opens slightly, the air fresher, lighter. You can sense you are approaching the upper levels, where the view will open fully to the night sky. Oddly, you imagine voices carried by the wind, shouts of watchmen, or perhaps faint laughter. Scholars still argue whether night watch duties were solemn or filled with camaraderie, but you let the imagined sounds blend into the night, a soft background hum against the stillness of your journey. You pause once more, leaning against the wall, letting the silence wrap around you. The castle breathes quietly through its stones, and you, caught within its spiral, are part of that breath. Oddly, it feels less like you're visiting history, and more like history is visiting you, guiding your steps, softening your thoughts, and carrying you upward into its dream. You emerge from the spiral staircase into a rounded tower chamber, the walls thick and the ceiling arched overhead. The air feels lighter here, tinged with a faint scent of old wood and stone warmed by the day's sun. You probably won't survive this view, because once you step toward the narrow window, you're greeted with a panorama that makes your heart catch. The landscape stretches in every direction. Rolling hills spill into valleys, forests cluster like dark shadows, and a river winds silver through the distance. From this high vantage point, the castle no longer feels like stone confining you, but like wings lifting you. Scholars still argue whether such towers were primarily military watchpoints or symbols of power, but tonight they serve as an invitation to dream. You press your hands against the cool stone windowsill, leaning slightly outward. The air rushes over your face, carrying the crisp smell of grass, wood smoke from distant villages, and the faint, almost sweet scent of wildflowers drifting up the slopes. Oddly, the world below feels alive, yet hushed, like a living painting created just for your eyes. Turning back into the chamber, you notice the simplicity of the room. A low wooden bed frame rests against one wall, its straw mattress long decayed, but still leaving a faint imprint on the stone. Oddly, someone carved initials into the wooden frame, letters whose meaning has been lost to time. Scholars still argue whether towers like this were reserved for guards, scribes, or lesser nobles, but tonight the anonymity feels freeing. Anyone could have once stood here, perhaps even someone just like you. The walls themselves are bare, save for faint scratches and discoloration. Your torchlight flickers over them, revealing traces of soot that suggest candles once burned here often. Oddly, one patch of stone looks smoother, as though someone spent countless nights leaning in that exact spot, staring out into the dark. Scholars still debate whether these rooms were designed for comfort or simple function, but the quiet traces of humanity suggest both. As you wander the circular room, your footsteps echo softly. You pause by a small wooden chest, its lid broken and warped. Inside, only dust and splinters remain. Oddly, the emptiness feels more intriguing than treasure would have. It's a reminder of how objects vanish, but the stories linger. Scholars still argue whether castles were true fortresses or elaborate homes, but this empty chest whispers that they were both, places of defense and domestic life. The window calls you again. You stand at its narrow arch and gaze down at the courtyard below. Tiny figures, imaginary ones, born of your mind, move through the space. Guards patrolling, a cook hauling baskets, a child chasing after a cat. Oddly, the silence makes their presence more vivid, like shadows playing in your imagination. Scholars still argue whether castles buzzed with constant life or lay quiet between bursts of activity. But tonight, the quiet feels both peaceful and complete. You sit on the edge of the windowsill, the cool stone pressing against your back as you stare at the stars. The night sky glitters above, stretching wide, endless. Oddly, the stars seem to align with the shape of the tower itself, as though the castle were built not just to protect, but to reach upward, toward the heavens. Scholars still debate whether medieval builders aligned towers intentionally with celestial patterns, but here, the coincidence feels magical. The wind whirls softly through the window slit, tugging at your hair and brushing across your face. Its sound mingles with the occasional creak of the stone, creating a gentle, natural symphony. Oddly, the castle feels less like stone and more like a living creature, breathing alongside you. Scholars still argue whether castles were symbols of human mastery over nature or extensions of the landscape itself. But in this moment, the two feel inseparable. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over you. The tower cradles you like a protective shell, while the open window invites you to drift outward, into the sky, into the stars. Oddly, the balance between shelter and openness feels soothing, a reminder that safety and wonder can coexist. Scholars still argue whether life in a tower was lonely or contemplative, but your experience leans toward the latter, serenity edged with curiosity. Leaning back, you trace your fingers along the cold stone walls one last time, feeling their rough, uneven surface. Each stone is unique, fitted into the hole with care. Oddly, the irregularity feels deliberate, as though the builders wanted to leave small imperfections, little surprises for hands like yours centuries later. Scholars still argue whether such details mattered to the original inhabitants, but to you, they mattered deeply. The chamber fades into a soft rhythm of silence, wind, and faint echoes. You linger at the window, the stars overhead shimmering, the land below hushed, the stone around you steady and ancient. It's the kind of quiet that seeps into your bones, calming every restless thought, coaxing your body and mind to slow, soften, and drift. You know the spiral staircase still waits behind you, curling downward into the unseen, promising more chambers and corridors. But for now, the tower offers a pause, a vantage point not just over the land, but over your own wandering thoughts. And in that stillness, you feel yourself swayed gently, like a star caught between the sky and the earth, ready to drift into the next story. You descend carefully from the tower chamber, the spiral steps carrying you downward until you emerge into the heart of the castle courtyard. The night air greets you, cool and open, a stark contrast to the enclosed chambers you've been wandering. You probably won't survive this open space without pausing to marvel. It feels like stepping into the lungs of the castle itself, where everything breathes together. The courtyard stretches wide, surrounded on all sides by looming walls and towers. Moonlight spills across the stone, painting long shadows that seem to stretch toward you like lazy cats. In the center lies a stone well, its rope long frayed, its bucket missing. Scholars still argue whether such wells were practical water sources or symbols of abundance. But tonight, it feels like a silent anchor tying all the structures together. You wander slowly across the uneven cobblestones, your footsteps echoing in the open air. Oddly, you notice tufts of grass poking through the cracks, small rebellions of nature reclaiming space. You bend to touch them, feeling the cool blades between your fingers. Scholars still debate whether courtyards were carefully maintained gardens or utilitarian workspaces, but the contrast of stone and grass creates its own kind of harmony. Your eyes drift toward the remains of a stable along one wall. The wooden beams have collapsed, yet faint outlines of stalls remain visible. You imagine horses stamping their hooves, servants bustling with hay, and the soft nickering that once filled the air. Oddly, a horseshoe lies half buried in the dirt, rusted, broken, yet still recognizable. Scholars still argue whether horses in castles were luxury symbols or necessities, but here the ghost of their presence lingers in quiet dignity. On the opposite side, you notice a crumbling archway leading into what was once a kitchen. The air seems thicker there, as if soot and smoke are still clinging to the stones. You imagine cauldrons bubbling, bread baking, and voices shouting orders. Oddly, you catch the faint scent of something sweet. Imagination, perhaps, but vivid enough to make you smile. Scholars still argue whether castle kitchens were centers of abundance or barely functional, but tonight they feel alive with flavor and warmth. The moonlight shifts as clouds drift across the sky, plunging the courtyard briefly into shadow. You pause, letting the darkness wrap around you like a soft blanket. Oddly, instead of unease, you feel comforted. The silence here is protective, as though the castle has closed its eyes to rest. Scholars still debate whether courtyards were designed as defensive choke points or communal gathering places, but for you, it's simply a cradle of stillness beneath the night sky. You move closer to the well, leaning against its worn edge. The stones are smooth, polished by countless hands. You peer inside, but the depths reveal nothing, just a shadowy void that swallows your torchlight. Oddly, the emptiness feels less ominous and more soothing, like a secret held safe in the earth. Scholars still argue whether wells in castles ran dry over centuries or were deliberately sealed, but the mystery invites your imagination deeper. Along the wall, a narrow staircase leads to the battlements. Guards once stood there, watching over the land, scanning the horizon for danger. You imagine their cloaks billowing in the wind, their lanterns glowing faintly. Oddly, the stones along the stair are polished smooth in the center, but rough at the edges, suggesting the footsteps of countless men moving in hurried rhythm. Scholars still argue whether those guards lived in constant fear or quiet routine, but you can almost hear their boots echoing in the night air. The courtyard itself holds odd traces of past lives. A broken toy carved from wood, half a clay pot, faint scorch marks along one wall. Each detail tells a fragment of a story, yet none give the whole picture. Oddly, the incompleteness is comforting. It leaves room for you to fill the gaps, to imagine laughter, quarrels, and mundane tasks woven into the fabric of castle life. Scholars still argue whether history lies in grand narratives or in these small remnants, but tonight, the little things feel far more alive. You pause at the center again, turning slowly in a circle. The castle walls rise high above you, protective and enclosing, yet the open sky stretches infinitely beyond. Oddly, the balance feels perfect, grounded and sheltered, yet infinite and free. Scholars still debate whether courtyards symbolize the heart of the castle or were merely practical spaces, but you feel it here. This is the pulse, the rhythm, the breath of the fortress. Your footsteps carry you toward a shadowy corner where ivy climbs stubbornly along the stone. You run your fingers along the leaves, cool and damp. Oddly, it feels like a secret garden, hiding in plain sight. Scholars still argue whether such growth was encouraged for beauty or simply tolerated, but in the moonlight, the ivy becomes a living lace, softening the hard stone. The courtyard breathes with you now. Stone, grass, ivy, shadows, and stars, combining into a rhythm that slows your thoughts, softens your body, and steadies your mind. Oddly, it doesn't feel like you're alone. It feels like the castle itself is keeping you company, humming quietly as it guides you toward deeper rest. Scholars still argue whether castles were homes, prisons, or fortresses, but tonight, this courtyard feels like a sanctuary under the moon. You slip beneath a low archway leading out of the courtyard and find yourself in a long, dimly lit corridor. The air is cooler here, tinged with the faint smell of damp mortar and old dust, as if the stones themselves have been exhaling for centuries. You probably won't survive this corridor without imagining ghostly footsteps pacing alongside your own, because the echoes play tricks, multiplying each sound until it feels like company. The corridor walls are thick, lined with narrow slits for light and defense. Moonlight sneaks in through these gaps, striping the floor with pale silver bars. Scholars still argue whether these narrow openings were primarily for archers or ventilation, but tonight they act like delicate strokes of paint across the rough stone canvas. Oddly, the beams of light sway slightly, as though they're alive, following you with each step. Your torch flickers and elongates shadows, painting strange shapes across the walls. At one point, the shadow resembles a hunched figure, then shifts into a sprawling bird. Oddly, you feel less unsettled and more entertained, as though the corridor is staging a shadow play just for you. Scholars still debate whether medieval people interpreted such shifting shadows as omens, but you let them serve as sleepy, fleeting distractions on your walk. You trail your hand along the wall, feeling grooves etched into the stone. Some are deliberate, crosses, initials, strange symbols, while others are the simple result of centuries of wear. Oddly, one carving resembles a spiral, echoing the staircase you just climbed. Scholars still argue whether such marks were idle graffiti or coded messages, but the mystery invites you to imagine hidden conversations between long-gone inhabitants. Halfway down, a wooden door juts from the wall, its iron handle cold to the touch. You nudge it open, and the hinges squeal softly, like a violin string stretched too tight. The small room beyond is empty, save for the faint outlines of shelves carved into the stone. Oddly, a single cobweb sways in the corner, catching the torchlight like spun glass. Scholars still argue whether such side chambers were storage rooms or secret guard posts, but the silence here feels thick, protective, and oddly soothing. Back in the corridor, your footsteps continue, steady and slow. The air grows cooler the farther you walk, suggesting underground chambers or passageways nearby. Oddly, your breath clouds faintly in front of you, even though the night isn't cold. Scholars still debate whether drafts in castles were accidental or carefully engineered, but this chill feels like the castle's whisper, guiding you deeper. Another window slit offers a glimpse outside, the dark expanse of the moat glistening faintly in the moonlight. You lean close, feeling the damp air brush your face. Oddly, ripples move across the water, even though the wind is still. Scholars still argue whether moats were primarily defensive or symbolic, but here the water feels like a mirror, reflecting your own thoughts back to you in slow, hypnotic waves. At the far end of the corridor, you encounter a staircase leading downward. The steps vanish into a darker shadow, promising cellars, kitchens, or maybe storage vaults. Oddly, the air carries a faint metallic tang, almost like iron or rust. Scholars still argue whether such spaces were feared or simply part of daily castle routine, but tonight they invite your curiosity with a lullaby's pull. The corridor itself narrows slightly, forcing you to brush closer to the walls. You feel the rough stone graze your arm, grounding you in its ancient texture. Oddly, the closeness feels more comforting than confining, like being wrapped in a heavy blanket. Scholars still debate whether medieval corridors were intentionally narrow for defense or simply due to space constraints, but either way, the effect is strangely calming. As you reach the end of the corridor, you pause and glance back. The moonlight stripes, the shifting shadows, the etched symbols, and the faint chill all merge into a rhythm that feels both eerie and gentle. Oddly, the corridor doesn't feel empty. It feels like a companion, guiding you with whispers of stone and shadow. Scholars still argue whether such passageways were merely practical arteries of the castle or if they held symbolic meaning, but tonight it is a tunnel into stillness, leading you closer to sleep. You take one last step forward, the sound echoing down into the stairwell. The air grows heavier, cooler, and quieter, promising deeper secrets below. Oddly, you feel both anticipation and serenity, as if the castle itself is saying, "Keep going," but softly. You place your foot on the first step, and immediately the air thickens, carrying the scent of cool stone and something faintly metallic. The staircase curves downward, a slow spiral that seems to swallow you whole. The walls hug tight around you, forcing your torchlight to press close and flicker against every surface. You probably won't survive this descent without feeling like you're being digested by the castle itself, but somehow that's part of the charm. Each step is uneven, worn smooth by centuries of boots, bare feet, and perhaps the occasional armored guard stumping down in haste. The sound of your tread echoes strangely, repeating in a rhythm that doesn't quite match your pace. Oddly, it feels like there's another set of feet following just behind. Scholars still argue whether spiral staircases were designed to confuse enemies or simply save space, but tonight they feel like looping tunnels into the belly of sleep. The temperature drops with every turn. Your breath forms faint clouds in the dim light, vanishing almost as quickly as they appear. The stones glisten with a thin sheen of dampness, and when you brush your hand along the wall, it comes away cold and slick. Oddly, you catch the faint scent of herbs, maybe rosemary or thyme. Scholars still debate whether kitchens were always below ground or sometimes moved higher, but this aroma suggests food once lingered here, steeped into the walls like a recipe you can't quite remember. Halfway down, you find a small recess in the wall. A candle stub rests there, long hardened into a waxy lump. Oddly, the way the wax dripped makes it look like tiny icicles frozen in mid-melt. Scholars still argue whether servants or guards used these alcoves, but their presence is comforting, as though someone wanted to leave light for the next traveler. The staircase continues, and your ears pick up a faint hum, low, almost like a vibration. Maybe it's water rushing through unseen channels, or the faint breeze weaving its way down from above. Oddly, the hum seems to match your own heartbeat, sinking step by step. Scholars still debate whether medieval builders intentionally created acoustic effects in castles, but tonight it feels like the stairwell is singing to you, a soft lullaby of stone and echo. At the bottom, the staircase opens into a vaulted chamber. The ceiling arches high above, crisscrossed with stone ribs that meet like fingers laced together. Your torchlight reveals barrels lined along one wall, their wood cracked and bound with rusting iron hoops. Oddly, one barrel is tipped slightly, and a faint trickle of liquid glistens on the floor. You crouch to sniff. It smells faintly of vinegar, sharp and sour. Scholars still argue whether medieval wine cellars doubled as storage for water or ale, but either way, the aroma lingers like a forgotten toast. Beyond the barrels, a second chamber stretches out. This one is lined with hooks on the walls, some still holding scraps of chain. Oddly, one hook holds nothing but a desiccated length of rope, twisted into a perfect coil as though waiting for its owner. Scholars still debate whether such rooms were storerooms, workshops, or even dungeons, but the ambiguity lets your imagination wander in 100 directions. You run your fingers along the walls again, this time finding marks you don't recognize. They aren't crosses or initials, but long vertical strokes grouped in sets of 5. Oddly, they look like tally marks, a quiet record of something once counted: days, prisoners, or maybe bottles of wine. Scholars still argue whether such marks were official or simply idle scratches, but their presence feels intimate, like someone wanted to whisper, "I was here," across centuries. At the far end of the chamber, a small iron door sits flush against the stone. Rust coats its hinges, and when you push gently, it creaks open to reveal a narrow passage. Cold air rushes out, smelling faintly of earth and stone. Oddly, the draft feels purposeful, almost guiding. Scholars still debate whether these passages were escape routes or ventilation shafts, but tonight they feel like veins carrying breath into the castle's hidden heart. You hesitate at the threshold, listening to the silence. The hum from earlier has faded, replaced by the occasional drip of water somewhere deep inside the walls. Oddly, each drip echoes like a clock tick, measuring time slowly, patiently. Scholars still argue whether underground chambers were feared or simply mundane, but you find yourself lulled by the rhythm, sinking into its sleepy cadence. As you step through the doorway, the chamber behind you fades into shadow. Ahead, the passage curves and disappears into darkness, promising yet another secret. Oddly, instead of dread, you feel comfort, like the castle is drawing you deeper, wrapping you in its cool embrace. Scholars still debate whether descending into darkness inspired fear or reverence, but tonight it simply feels like the natural path toward dreams. The narrow passage closes in around you, the walls brushing your shoulders if you sway even slightly. The ceiling dips low enough that you have to tilt your head forward, your torch angled just so to keep from singeing the soot-blackened stone. You probably won't survive this tunnel without imagining it shrinking tighter, pressing you into a thin, whispering memory of yourself. But somehow, the snugness feels like a cocoon instead of a trap. Your footsteps land on uneven flagstones, some cracked, others sunken with centuries of shifting earth. Every step produces a different sound, sometimes a hollow thump, sometimes a muted scrape. Oddly, one stone echoes sharper than the others, as though there's a cavity beneath it. Scholars still argue whether such hollow spots mark secret caches or simply the settling of foundations, but you pause a moment, letting the idea of hidden treasure lull you. The torchlight flickers across the wall, revealing faint streaks of black. At first they look like cracks, but closer inspection suggests soot or smoke trails rising upward. Oddly, the streaks align perfectly with small vent holes in the ceiling. Scholars still debate whether these shafts were for airflow or for guiding smoke out from underground kitchens, but their alignment feels purposeful, like secret exhalations of the castle itself. Deeper in, the passage widens into a small alcove. A stone bench juts from the wall, worn smooth by countless bodies resting here. You sit briefly, feeling the chill of the stone seep into you, almost grounding you like a weighted blanket. Oddly, the bench curves slightly, cradling your back in a way that seems too intentional for chance. Scholars still debate whether masons designed such shapes deliberately or if erosion simply sculpted comfort over time. Beside the bench, the wall carries a faint carving, a shield with a crude lion scratched inside it. The lines are jagged, uneven, as though drawn hastily with a dagger. Oddly, the lion looks more like a playful cat than a ferocious beast. Scholars still debate whether these carvings were heraldic marks or idle doodles by bored guards, but tonight it feels like the sleepy sketch of someone passing a slow watch. The passage continues, and soon you notice a faint draft tugging at your torch. The flame leans ahead, pointing towards some unseen opening. Oddly, the draft carries a whiff of something sweet, like dried fruit or honey. Scholars still debate whether food stores were kept underground for preservation, but the scent tempts you, as if the castle still clutches a centuries-old feast in its belly. Further along, you reach a low archway where the ceiling dips even more. You crouch, scraping your shoulder against damp stone. The texture leaves a dark smudge on your sleeve, almost like ink. Oddly, when you sniff it, the smell is faintly metallic, like iron. Scholars still debate whether subterranean stains are mineral deposits or remnants of long-forgotten use, but you let the uncertainty add to the quiet mystery. Beyond the arch, the passage empties into another chamber, this one smaller, almost spherical, with walls curving up into a domed ceiling. The acoustics change instantly. Every small sound you make ricochets around like a whisper magnified a dozen times. Oddly, your breath sounds louder than it should, as though you've stumbled into a stone-made echo chamber. Scholars still argue whether such round rooms were intentional for storage efficiency or accidental results of collapsing Earth, but the effect is hypnotic, amplifying silence until it becomes a lullaby. In the center of the floor lies a shallow stone basin filled with stagnant water. The surface ripples slightly, disturbed by drops falling from above. You kneel to look, and your reflection shivers and distorts. Oddly, when the torchlight catches the water, It creates shapes on the ceiling that resemble dancing figures. Scholars still debate whether medieval people interpreted water reflections as omens, but for you, it's an accidental puppet show, quiet and entrancing. When you stand again, the chamber feels warmer than before, though no fire burns here. Perhaps it's the closeness of the space, the way the air circulates in slow circles. Oddly, the warmth is comforting, like the steady presence of someone sitting just beside you. Scholars still argue whether underground rooms were intended to shelter people during sieges, but tonight it feels like the castle inviting you to linger, to stay a little longer before drifting onward. At the far edge of the chamber, another corridor opens, this one even narrower, almost daring you to squeeze through. You take a deep breath, the damp air thick with minerals and the faint sweetness you caught earlier. Oddly, it feels like you're about to crawl into the lungs of the castle itself. Scholars still debate whether such tunnels led to granaries, guard posts, or escape routes. But for you, it's just the next step. Soft, slow, and strangely reassuring. You press forward, the sounds of dripping water fading behind you, carrying only the quiet echo of your own steady breath. The narrow corridor funnels you forward until you're practically brushing both walls with your arms. Your torch sputters in the confined air, its glow bouncing wildly against the stone, making it feel like you're walking through a tunnel of fireflies trapped in amber. You probably won't survive this squeeze without imagining the walls inching closer. But instead of panic, the thought drifts into comfort, like being tucked tightly into a bed of stone. The floor here dips unevenly, puddles forming in shallow hollows. Each step splashes softly, the sound carrying ahead before it fades. Oddly, the water tastes faintly mineral-rich when you catch a droplet on your lips. Scholars still argue whether these seepages were considered nuisances or blessings, since castles often struggled with fresh water supplies. For you, the flavor is oddly grounding, like sipping from history itself. The passage eventually widens, opening into a low-roofed chamber supported by squat pillars. The ceiling seems lower here, pressing down with a weight you can almost feel in your chest. Oddly, one pillar bears faint chisel marks in the shape of concentric circles. They look deliberate but unfinished, like a mason was called away mid-task. Scholars still debate whether such symbols carried ritual meaning or were just practice carvings. But the pattern makes your eyes feel heavy, spiraling you into drowsiness. On the far wall, you spot a recess lined with iron brackets. Some still hold rotting scraps of wood, perhaps shelves or beams that once supported storage crates. Oddly, one bracket has bent downward, as though crushed under impossible weight. Scholars still argue whether underground stores collapsed due to overfilling or shifting soil, but the bent iron feels like a frozen gesture of surrender. In the corner, a pile of stones catches your attention. At first, it looks like rubble, but when you lean closer, you see a deliberate stack, flat stones arranged in neat layers like a crude table or altar. Oddly, a faint scorch mark mars the top surface, as if something had been burned there long ago. Scholars still debate whether such structures were practical workspaces or places of ritual, but the charred stone whispers of firelight flickering in the darkness centuries ago. As you continue, the air shifts. It grows warmer, carrying with it the faint scent of something earthy, almost like mushrooms. You crouch low, spotting a patch of pale growth in a damp corner. Oddly, the fungus glows faintly in your torchlight. Not bright enough to be self-luminous, but enough to trick your tired eyes. Scholars still argue whether medieval people recognized and used such growths, but in this quiet chamber, they feel like secret nightlights, guiding you gently forward. The chamber narrows again into another tunnel, but this one has a noticeable slope. You descend gradually, your footsteps echoing differently now, less sharp, more muffled, as though the walls are thicker, swallowing the sound. Oddly, you begin to feel as if you're moving underwater, the dampness clinging to your skin and slowing your thoughts. Scholars still debate whether deep passages were meant for drainage or escape, but in your sleepy haze, it feels like drifting through a dream current. Eventually, you spot a faint shimmer ahead, not torchlight, but something subtler, moonlight, leaking in through a narrow shaft high in the wall. The shaft is so slim you can't imagine anyone squeezing through, but the glow spreads like a soft silver veil across the floor. Oddly, the beam falls directly on a carved stone, smoother and brighter than the rest. Scholars still argue whether these shafts were deliberate astronomical alignments or accidental cracks, but tonight the effect is ritualistic, like the castle breathing a secret to the night sky. You kneel near the illuminated stone, letting your hand rest on its cool surface. The silver glow mixes with your torchlight, painting your skin half gold, half pale blue. Oddly, you feel as though you're sitting between two worlds, above and below, light and dark, past and present. Scholars still debate whether medieval builders intended such effects, but for you, it's a perfect midpoint, a pause in the journey, an exhale before the next step. When you rise, the passage curves onward, disappearing once more into deep shadow. Your torch steadies, the flame calmer now, as though it too has grown used to the rhythm of descent. Oddly, you no longer feel pressed by the walls or chilled by the air. Instead, the tunnel feels like a quiet companion, leading you further into the castle's hidden, breathing heart. The tunnel guides you forward until the ceiling suddenly rises, giving you room to breathe again. The shift feels dramatic after the tight squeeze you just endured, like stepping from under a heavy blanket into open night air. Your torch stretches upward, throwing jagged shadows high above, revealing a vaulted chamber. You probably won't survive this space without imagining it yawning wider and wider. But instead of fear, the vastness fills you with a sleepy awe, like staring up at a cathedral roof from the safety of a pew. The chamber smells faintly of smoke, though no fire burns here. You tilt your head and notice a blackened patch of stone arching along the ceiling, as though the chamber once hosted flames so large their heat scarred the rock itself. Oddly, the scorch marks form feather-like patterns, as though smoke had brushed the stone with deliberate strokes. Scholars still argue whether underground fires were signs of kitchens, forges, or rituals, but tonight, the marks feel like a painting, left just for you. Along the wall, several niches are carved into the stone, each large enough to hold a barrel, a chest, or perhaps even a person. Most sit empty, but one contains a crumbled wooden frame, eaten away by centuries of dampness. Oddly, a single rusted hinge clings stubbornly to the rotting timber. Scholars still debate whether these niches were used for storage or concealment, but the lone hinge feels like an artifact of persistence, a tiny sentinel refusing to vanish. As you move deeper into the chamber, your footsteps take on a new quality. The floor here is smoother, polished by long use. It feels almost like walking across glass, each step echoing clearly in the hollow space. Oddly, the echoes overlap, creating an illusion of multiple people walking beside you. Scholars still argue whether these acoustics were intentional or accidental, but the overlapping rhythms sound like an invisible escort, guiding you softly toward the center. There, you discover a circular stone well, set flush with the ground. Its rim is smooth, cool, and slightly chipped in places. Peering inside, your torchlight reveals only darkness, the water below too deep to catch a reflection. You drop a small pebble, and after a long pause, a faint splash answers. Oddly, the delay between the drop and the splash feels longer than it should, as though the well stretches into another world. Scholars still debate whether such wells were sacred, practical, or symbolic, but the stillness of its water carries a strange hush that seeps into your bones. Beside the well lies a discarded length of chain, its links heavy and mottled with rust. One end disappears into the darkness of the shaft. Oddly, when you tug gently, the chain resists, as though something deep below still anchors it. Scholars still argue whether chains like these raised buckets or restrained something less mundane, but tonight it feels like the castle's tether to its own hidden heart. On the opposite side of the chamber, an archway leads to another corridor, but this one is blocked halfway by a pile of fallen stone. You crouch near the rubble, noting the way moss has begun to grow across the edges, even this deep underground. Oddly, one stone bears a faint spiral pattern, carved deliberately, now half buried. Scholars still debate whether such carvings carried magical associations or were mere decorations, but the spiral seems to beckon, drawing your eyes in slow, sleepy loops. You sit briefly near the rubble, letting the torch rest at your side. In the flickering half-light, the chamber feels like it's breathing, shadows expanding and shrinking, echoes rising and falling, all in time with your own inhale and exhale. Oddly, the space feels less like an empty ruin and more like a companion humming a lullaby. Scholars still argue whether people of the past would have felt awe or fear in such spaces, but tonight the sensation tilts gently toward comfort. When you finally rise, you notice a faint current of air drifting from behind the rubble. It carries the scent of soil and fresh stone, as though the castle itself still hides new passages. Oddly, the unseen draft feels reassuring, like a whisper promising more secrets if only you're patient. Scholars still debate whether collapsed corridors hid treasures or just dead ends, but the air tells you this story isn't finished. You turn back toward the chamber, torch lifted high one last time. The scorched ceiling, the polished echoes, the silent well, all combine into a single mood, quiet endurance. Oddly, the room doesn't feel abandoned. It feels alive, waiting. And as you step once more toward the open archway, you carry its patience with you, like a soft stone pressed into your palm. You step away from the chamber and into another stretch of corridor, this one wider, almost grand by comparison. The ceiling arches into a shallow curve, and for the first time in a while, you can walk freely without hunching your shoulders. The torchlight rolls ahead, revealing smooth stone walls that glimmer faintly, as though the surface has been polished. You probably won't survive this walk without imagining torch-bearing processions sweeping down here centuries ago, but the thought is oddly soothing, like you're simply joining a silent parade that never ended. Your footsteps strike the floor with a hollow resonance. Unlike the muffled corridors above, this one amplifies every sound, each step ringing like a soft drumbeat. Oddly, when you pause, the silence afterward feels heavy, pressing into your ears. Scholars still argue whether such hallways were designed for acoustics, perhaps to intimidate or impress, or if the effect is merely accidental. Tonight, it becomes your private metronome, keeping pace with your sleepy heartbeat. The walls here carry faint remnants of plaster, clinging in pale flakes like parchment peeling away. When you lift your torch closer, you see fragments of color, reds, blues, ochres, tiny hints of long-lost paintings. Oddly, one fragment forms the outline of a hand, stretched wide as though reaching out. Scholars still debate whether medieval murals underground depicted saints, warnings, or simple decoration. But the fading colors feel like forgotten lullabies, their voices dissolving into stone. As you continue, the air grows warmer. The faint metallic tang of the earlier chambers shifts into something more earthy, almost like charcoal or ash. You round a bend and discover why. A massive fireplace built directly into the wall, its stone maw blackened from centuries of flame. Oddly, the soot inside forms streaks that resemble ribs, as though the fire once burned inside the belly of some great beast. Scholars still argue whether underground kitchens were common or reserved for special purposes. But the ghost of heat here feels strangely protective, like the memory of a hearth still glowing. Beside the fireplace, a heap of broken pottery shards lies scattered on the ground. Some are plain, but others glint with faint glaze, blue patterns swirling like waves. Oddly, one piece still carries the lip of a jug, curved perfectly, as though waiting to be filled again. Scholars still debate whether pottery fragments were discarded carelessly or deliberately buried, but these shards hum with everyday echoes, soft reminders that even the simplest cups once mattered here. A few steps further, you notice a row of niches carved low into the wall. Each is about the size of a loaf of bread, shallow but uniform, their bottoms smoothed by repeated use. Oddly, one still contains a crumbly lump of something dark, hardened beyond recognition. Scholars still argue whether these niches held loaves, candles, or small relics. But in this quiet moment, they seem like shelves in a stone pantry, ordinary, domestic, strangely intimate. The corridor bends again, and your torchlight catches something unexpected. Iron hooks set high along the walls. Some are bent, others broken, but their placement suggests they once supported torches or banners. Oddly, one hook still clings to a fragment of cloth, darkened with age, but faintly patterned. Scholars still debate whether such cloth remnants were decoration or function, but the idea of banners fluttering here adds color to the otherwise gray stone. You pause, leaning your back against the wall. The stone is cool, but not damp. In fact, it feels oddly dry compared to the chambers behind you. Perhaps this section was better sealed, more carefully maintained. Scholars still argue whether ventilation systems were that advanced, but the crisp stillness here feels refreshing, as though you've stepped into a preserved pocket of the past. Ahead, the corridor narrows again, leading into a smaller doorway framed with dressed stone blocks. Above it, you notice a faint carving, 2 crossed keys etched roughly into the lintel. Oddly, the design feels deliberate, a quiet marker left for those who knew how to read it. Scholars still debate whether such symbols marked storerooms, treasuries, or passages of importance, but tonight the carving feels like an invitation, beckoning you deeper. You steady your torch and step forward, feeling the hush of the corridor settle around you like a cloak. The warmth of the fireplace, the ghost of banners, the forgotten murals, they all linger behind, like gentle voices fading into silence as you prepare to push open another chapter of the castle's story. The doorway with the crossed keys above it feels heavier than the others you've passed, though the stone blocks framing it are no different in size or cut. You push your shoulder against the wooden door still hanging inside the frame, and it groans open reluctantly, as if the room beyond has been waiting for centuries to exhale. You probably won't survive this moment without imagining that what lies ahead has been sealed for you alone, but the thought settles warmly, as if you've been invited into a secret. Inside, the chamber is square and unusually tidy compared to the ruins behind you. The floor is paved with smoother stones, fitted neatly, and though dust covers everything, the surfaces feel less broken, more deliberate. Oddly, the air carries a faint sweetness, like dried fruit left too long in a cupboard. Scholars still argue whether such chambers were storerooms for valuables or food, but the faint fragrance drifts around you like an old lullaby. Along one wall stand several wooden chests, their lids collapsed inward from rot. You brush your hand across one, and flakes of wood crumble like stale bread. Oddly, a glint of metal peeks through a crack, the corroded edge of a lock still clinging to its place. Scholars still debate whether such chests held coin, linens, or records, but tonight the treasure is simpler. The quiet sense of lives once folded carefully into these boxes. On the opposite wall, shelves carved directly into the stone rise in narrow tiers. Most are bare, but one still holds a clay jar capped with a stone lid. You lift it gently. It's lighter than expected. Oddly, when you rattle it, something faint shifts inside, a soft rattle like dried seeds. Scholars still argue whether medieval seeds were ever preserved in this way, but the thought of sleeping kernels waiting centuries to sprout lulls you with its patience. Near the corner, your torchlight catches something unexpected, a cluster of wax hardened onto the floor. The shape is irregular, like someone once dropped a candle here and let it burn itself out. Oddly, the melted wax has fossilized into ridges that resemble a tiny landscape of hills and valleys. Scholars still debate whether such remnants suggest ritual or simply clumsiness, but you find yourself tracing the ridges with your finger as though they're a miniature map. The ceiling above this chamber arches gently, higher than most you've seen underground. Stalactite-like drips of lime hang down where water once seeped. Oddly, one has grown into a delicate spiral, a natural echo of the carved spirals you've seen elsewhere in the castle. Scholars still argue whether medieval people noticed and revered such formations, but in your drowsy gaze, it feels like the castle sketching lullabies into stone. In the center of the room lies a table made of stone slabs, its surface flat but scarred with scratches. Some are straight, others curved, like marks from knives or chisels. Oddly, a groove runs along the edge, collecting dust in a neat line. Scholars still debate whether such tables served as workbenches, altars, or sorting platforms, but the marks whisper of hands busy with forgotten tasks, steady and repetitive, their rhythm blending into the silence. As you circle the table, you notice a small iron key on the ground, half buried in grit. Its teeth are worn, the bow bent slightly out of shape, but it still holds the stubborn dignity of something once essential. Oddly, the key feels warmer than the stone floor when you pick it up, as if it's been waiting for you. Scholars still argue whether such finds are chance or staged relics from later centuries, but the sensation in your palm is enough to stir sleepy wonder. At the back wall, you discover another doorway, narrower than the first. It lacks a frame, just a simple arched cut into the stone. The air drifting through is cooler, tinged with moisture. Oddly, the draft carries the faint sound of dripping water, steady as a clock. Scholars still debate whether such passages always led to wells or sometimes extended to hidden exits, but the sound feels like an invitation forward, a reminder that the castle's secrets aren't finished yet. Before you step through, you glance back at the chamber. The collapsed chests, the jar of seeds, the fossilized wax, the spiral dripstone, all seemed arranged like a still life painted by time. Oddly, the room feels less like storage and more like memory itself, a quiet archive where the castle keeps its forgotten dreams. And as you turn to follow the sound of water, you carry those dreams with you, tucked gently into the hush of your own. You step through the narrow archway, leaving behind the tidy chamber and entering a corridor that slopes gently downward. The air here feels heavier, moist, carrying the faint scent of earth and stone. You probably won't survive this part without imagining that you are moving deeper into the veins of the castle itself, but the weight is comforting, a quiet press that steadies your thoughts and slows your pulse. The walls are rougher here. The stones are regularly shaped, fitted together in a haphazard fashion. You run your hand along them and feel tiny grooves and pits worn by centuries of touch. Oddly, the surface seems to hum faintly under your fingers, a vibration you can't explain. Scholars still argue whether irregular masonry was a sign of rushed construction or deliberate design, but for you, it feels like the castle whispering its history through touch. Small puddles dot the uneven floor. Some are murky, reflecting the torchlight in broken fragments. Oddly, when you peer into one, it seems to hold an image of yourself multiplied, a shadowy echo that follows your movements. Scholars still debate whether reflective surfaces in castles were ever interpreted as omens or superstitions, but tonight it feels like a gentle trick, a playful companion in the darkness. The corridor bends again, opening slightly into a vaulted chamber. Here, the ceiling is low, supported by a series of thick stone pillars. Oddly, each pillar bears notches, carved meticulously into the stone. Scholars still argue whether these were measurements, tally marks, or purely decorative, but the rhythm of the notches under your eyes induces a sleepy cadence, like counting sheep in stone form. A rusted lantern hangs from one of the pillars, swaying gently as if moved by some unseen hand. Oddly, when your torchlight catches it, the lantern casts a soft, flickering shadow that looks like wings stretched wide across the walls. Scholars still debate whether medieval interiors were planned with such shadow play in mind, but to you, it is a soothing spectacle, hypnotic in its slow dance. Near the center of the chamber, the floor dips into a shallow pit. Stones are arranged in concentric circles, suggesting deliberate placement. Oddly, a few stones seem polished, worn smooth by frequent touch or movement. Scholars still argue whether such pits were ritual spaces, storage, or simply drainage, but the pattern itself is mesmerizing, a circular lullaby that draws your eyes inward. One of the walls has a small barred window, barely wide enough to see through. You peer outside and catch a glimpse of moonlight glinting on wet stones beyond. Oddly, a shadow moves across the surface, but when you blink, it vanishes. Scholars still debate whether tiny windows were for ventilation, defense, or signaling, but tonight it feels like a gentle trick, a playful companion in the darkness. The corridor bends again, opening slightly into a narrow doorway. Approaching slowly, you notice a faint draft that carries the smell of mineral-rich water. Oddly, the air feels alive, almost like it's guiding you forward. Scholars still argue whether these passages led to underground streams, cisterns, or secret escape routes, but tonight it feels like the castle offering a secret path, softly urging you onward. As you pass the pillars and enter the doorway, the corridor beyond narrows again, the walls pressing in just slightly. The torchlight flickers, highlighting small carvings in the stone. Lines, swirls, and faint shapes resembling leaves or vines. Oddly, they repeat in a gentle rhythm, like a secret pattern meant only for the observant. Scholars still debate whether such motifs were decorative, symbolic, or ritualistic, but for you, they create a hypnotic, sleepy cadence. You pause, taking a breath in the cool, slightly damp air. The corridor feels endless, yet intimate, a stretch of time and space designed for slow movement. Oddly, each step resonates softly, echoing off the walls in a muted symphony of stone. Scholars still argue whether underground corridors were purely functional or also intended to inspire reflection. But tonight, you feel both, the function and the quiet meditation of history, wrapping around you like a soft blanket. You continue along the narrow corridor, feeling the stones shift beneath your feet as if the castle itself is adjusting to your passage. The walls here are damp, slick with condensation, and your torchlight catches tiny droplets that shimmer like scattered diamonds. You probably won't survive this stretch without imagining centuries of footsteps echoing alongside yours, but instead of fear, you feel accompanied, as if the castle remembers every traveler who ever wandered here. The ceiling dips slightly, forcing you to bow your head. Oddly, you notice faint etchings, lines forming geometric patterns and small circles that appear deliberate. Scholars still argue whether these marks were counting systems, cryptic messages, or simply the mason's idle doodles, but tracing them with your eyes lulls you into a gentle rhythm, a silent melody of stone and time. A few steps further, the floor dips, forming a shallow trench along one side of the corridor. Water trickles softly in the depression, its movement producing a quiet, constant hum. Oddly, when you listen closely, the trickle seems to echo like whispers in a language you almost understand. Scholars still debate whether medieval builders designed such channels for drainage or secret communications, but tonight it sounds like the castle murmuring stories directly into your ears. The corridor opens into a chamber that feels unusually bright for underground space. Moonlight streams in through a tiny slit near the ceiling, striking a patch of smooth stone in a perfect rectangle. Oddly, the light illuminates faint carvings on the floor, tiny footprints, spirals, and stars etched so delicately they almost vanish in the shadow. Scholars still argue whether such carvings were playful, symbolic, or ritualistic, but for you, the tiny imprints create a sleepy narrative, guiding your mind gently forward. Near one wall, a rusted iron door leans open, creaking softly as the slight draft moves it. Oddly, the sound resonates like a sigh, echoing off the chamber walls. Scholars still debate whether these small side doors led to storage rooms, oubliettes, or secret passages, but the creak has a comforting cadence, like the castle itself exhaling and inviting you further. You step cautiously toward the iron door and find a narrow passage just beyond. The air grows cooler, tinged with mineral scent and faint mold. Oddly, the cooler air feels soothing, like a soft hand on your forehead, encouraging you to slow down, to notice each detail. Scholars still argue whether underground tunnels were purely functional or psychologically impactful, but you let the quiet embrace of temperature guide you forward. A shallow alcove in the wall catches your attention. Its stone surface bears tiny grooves and scratches, perhaps from tools or from countless hands brushing against it over time. Oddly, the patterns resemble a miniature labyrinth, winding endlessly without a clear start or end. Scholars still debate whether such marks were instructional, symbolic, or idle, but tracing them with your fingers slows your mind, pulling you toward the gentle verge of sleep. The corridor bends again, slightly upward this time, the slope subtle but noticeable. Your footsteps echo differently now, higher pitched now, resonating in a way that makes the space feel taller, almost cathedral-like. Oddly, the walls seem to hum softly in response, carrying the echo in faint vibrations that tickle your ears. Scholars still argue whether these acoustic phenomena were intentional or coincidental, but tonight they become a gentle soundscape, as if the castle itself is singing a lullaby. At the end of the chamber, another doorway appears, smaller and narrower than the last. The threshold is lined with stone blocks etched with faint symbols, worn smooth but still discernible. Oddly, the symbols seem to curve around the doorway, inviting you through in a soft, circular motion. Scholars still debate whether such carvings were protective, decorative, or coded instructions, but the effect is hypnotic, drawing you forward with ease. As you step through, the corridor continues into shadow, the faint trickle of water behind you fading. Oddly, the tunnel feels like it's guiding you on a gentle curve, like a hand steering your body and mind toward deeper calm. Scholars still argue whether these passageways were practical or psychologically in design, but tonight, the castle's choices are entirely in service of you, carrying your imagination and your drowsy thoughts deeper into the heart of history. The corridor narrows again, forcing you to walk single file against the rough stone walls. Your torch flickers, throwing shadows that dance wildly across the surface, creating shapes that your tired mind almost reads as faces or figures watching you. You probably won't survive this stretch without imagining ghostly sentinels trailing your steps, but instead of fear, the presence feels like quiet company, attentive and patient. The floor dips slightly, puddles forming in the hollows. You step carefully, splashing water softly, the sound echoing back like a gentle heartbeat. Oddly, each echo seems slightly delayed, as though the stone itself is measuring your pace. Scholars still debate whether such echoing acoustics were intentional or merely the result of architecture, but tonight it acts like a meditative rhythm, guiding you forward. Small stalactites drip slowly from the ceiling, their pointed tips catching the torchlight with tiny glimmers. Oddly, one drop lands in a puddle just so, sending a miniature splash that creates concentric ripples, like a ripple in time itself. Scholars still argue whether builders were conscious of natural formations in underground spaces, but you let the slow, repetitive pattern lull you, a quiet signal to relax and sink deeper into calm. Along the wall, you notice shallow carvings, barely perceptible under centuries of grime. Spirals, lines, and odd symbols trace a path toward the darker end of the corridor. Oddly, when you trace them with your finger, they seem to pulse faintly under your touch, like a subtle heartbeat. Scholars still debate whether such etchings were instructional, symbolic, or random, but the tactile sensation pulls you gently along, almost hypnotically. Halfway down the corridor, you pass a small alcove that once held a lantern. Only the rusted hook remains. Oddly, the hook still holds a faint shape in your imagination, the silhouette of flame, flickering softly as if it were alive. Scholars still debate whether lantern placements were purely functional or served as guides, but tonight the image acts like a quiet, reassuring ghost, keeping you company. The air grows cooler and heavier as you move further. Moisture clings to the walls, and the scent of wet stone mixes with a faint metallic tang. Oddly, the combination is oddly soothing, like a damp blanket tucked around you. Scholars still debate whether underground air currents were carefully planned or incidental, but in this moment, they cradle you, drawing your senses inward and slowing your thoughts. A low archway leads into a small chamber, almost circular. The floor is uneven, worn by centuries of footsteps, but the walls curve gently, enclosing the space like a protective shell. Oddly, small notches line the base of the wall, evenly spaced, as though someone measured them meticulously. Scholars still argue whether these served structural, decorative, or random purposes, but the repetition is hypnotic, a rhythm your mind follows without conscious effort. In the center of the chamber, a shallow basin is carved from stone. Water still collects in it, forming tiny pools that ripple when your torchlight glances across the surface. Oddly, the ripples catch and scatter light in soft patterns on the ceiling, like moving clouds frozen in stone. Scholars still debate whether medieval builders paid attention to such effects, but the spectacle is mesmerizing, quieting your thoughts and drawing you deeper into reverie. You notice a narrow passage leading away from the chamber, the walls damp and cool. Oddly, the passage seems narrower than before, but instead of constriction, it feels protective, like the castle is hugging you, guiding your path with gentle insistence. Scholars still argue whether these underground corridors were built for strategic purposes or simply followed the natural contours of the land, but tonight they exist solely for your slow, wandering journey. As you step forward, the echoes of dripping water fade behind you, replaced by silence broken only by the faint shuffle of your own feet. Oddly, the silence itself feels alive, almost sentient, wrapping around you in soft folds. Scholars still debate whether quiet in such chambers was intended or incidental, but the effect is perfect. A soft, calming cocoon carrying you steadily toward the next secret waiting deeper in the castle. The narrow passage slopes gently downward, and the air grows heavier, tinged with a faint, earthy scent that reminds you of damp moss and long-forgotten soil. You probably won't survive this descent without imagining centuries of unseen footsteps pressing against your back. But instead of fear, the sensation feels grounding, like being gently guided deeper into a secret world. The floor here is uneven, patches of stone worn smooth and others jagged and cracked. Oddly, some stones carry tiny, deliberate carvings, dots, lines, and small spirals arranged with care. Scholars still argue whether these marks were practical notations, ritual symbols, or simply idiosyncrasies of the builders. But tracing them with your fingers slows your heartbeat, like counting the rhythm of the castle itself. You notice a faint sound ahead, the drip of water echoing softly along the corridor. Oddly, the echoes seem to multiply, bouncing from wall to wall in overlapping whispers. Scholars still debate whether medieval architects understood acoustic effects underground or whether it was accidental. But for you, the rhythmic drip feels like a hypnotic pulse, coaxing your mind toward quiet. The walls are rougher here, flecked with mineral deposits that shimmer faintly in the torchlight. Oddly, some of the formations resemble tiny stalactites or delicate fans, though they are miniature, almost like natural ornaments left for the observant. Scholars still argue whether people of the past ever noticed these natural details or considered them magical, but tonight they feel like a subtle lullaby of stone and shadow. Halfway down, you pass a shallow recess carved into the wall. Oddly, a rusted metal hook remains embedded in the stone, and nearby, faint scratches hint at something once hung here. Scholars still debate whether hooks like these held lanterns, tools, or perhaps even small offerings. But the presence of this tiny artifact feels intimate, like the personal trace of someone long gone. A low archway leads into a chamber that opens wider than the corridor. The ceiling curves gently above, with faint blackened streaks marking where fires may have once burned. Oddly, the streaks form patterns, like feathers or abstract wings etched by smoke over time. Scholars still argue whether medieval builders or occupants interpreted such markings as omens or mere accidents, but the shapes mesmerize, drawing your eyes and calming your mind. In the chamber, a shallow stone basin rests against the wall. A thin film of water clings to its surface, disturbed only by occasional drips from the ceiling. Oddly, the ripples catch the torchlight and scatter it across the walls in a gentle dance of moving shadows. Scholars still debate whether such visual effects were noticed or used intentionally, but for you, they create a mesmerizing lull, like waves on a silent shore. Near the far wall, a narrow slit of a window allows a shaft of faint moonlight to seep through. Oddly, the beam lands directly on the basin, illuminating the water in a soft silver glow. Scholars still argue whether these windows were practical for light or symbolic, but tonight the effect feels like the castle pointing out its own quiet poetry, a gentle guide for your wandering attention. You step closer to the window, peering out at what seems to be the exterior courtyard far below. The moonlight glints off wet stones, casting elongated shadows. Oddly, one shadow looks like a figure crouching in the distance, only to vanish when you blink. Scholars still debate whether people of the past incorporated such illusions deliberately, but the fleeting image is hypnotic, pulling you gently forward with curiosity. Finally, the corridor curves again, leading you onward into deeper shadow. Oddly, the tunnel seems to narrow just enough to embrace you, comforting rather than constricting. Scholars still argue whether medieval tunnels were functional, psychological, or both, but tonight it feels like a gentle hand, guiding your pace, whispering that the next chamber will hold another secret to ease your wandering mind. The corridor opens into a low-ceilinged chamber, its walls damp with centuries of moisture. The air smells faintly metallic, mixed with the earthy scent of wet stone. You probably won't survive this room without imagining the countless unseen lives that passed through. But instead of dread, you feel a sleepy fascination, as if the castle itself has allowed you a private audience with its hidden veins. The floor is uneven, scattered with small stones and dust. Oddly, some stones are smoother than the rest, polished almost as if someone had walked the same path for decades. Scholars still argue whether these wear patterns indicate repeated labor or natural erosion, but your gaze lingers on the smooth surfaces, tracing them with quiet awe. Along one wall, shallow niches are carved at varying heights. Some are empty, others hold the faint residue of clay or wax. Oddly, one niche still has a tiny, hardened drop of wax shaped like a miniature candle. Scholars still debate whether such remnants were ritual offerings or simply accidental, but for you, the tiny shape seems like a whisper from the past, a soft signal to pause and breathe. In the center of the chamber, a shallow stone basin catches the torchlight. A thin layer of water shimmers on its surface. Oddly, when you glance into it, the reflection is fragmented by faint ripples, creating illusions of movement that trick your sleepy mind into seeing shapes in motion. Scholars still argue whether reflections in medieval spaces were noticed or symbolic, but tonight it serves as a hypnotic lull, coaxing your attention inward. The walls themselves carry subtle carvings, spirals, lines, and arcane symbols. Oddly, the patterns seem to repeat, forming a rhythm that almost matches your heartbeat. Scholars still debate whether these markings had practical, decorative, or ritualistic purposes, but tracing them with your eyes slows your thoughts, allowing you to drift deeper into the quiet cadence of the castle. Near the far corner, a narrow slit allows a faint beam of moonlight to creep in, illuminating a patch of the floor with silver glow. Oddly, the light seems to highlight one stone in particular, worn smoother than the rest, as if centuries of footsteps have pressed it into prominence. Scholars still argue whether such effects were intentional or coincidental, but the glowing stone draws your gaze like a quiet promise, guiding you to notice small details others might miss. A small rusted iron door leans ajar in another corner. Oddly, the creak it makes as you push it further open is soft, almost musical, echoing gently off the chamber walls. Scholars still debate whether small side doors were functional, storage, secret exits, or just architectural quirks, but the sound is comforting, like the castle breathing in time with your own exhale. The passage beyond the door slopes gently downward, the air growing cooler and heavier. Oddly, the faint draft carries a scent of wet stone mixed with distant vegetation, as though the tunnel connects subtly to the world above. Scholars still argue whether such underground corridors were planned for ventilation, escape, or ritual, but tonight, the fresh hint of the outside feels like a soft invitation forward. You step into the sloped passage, feeling the walls embrace you gently, their rough texture pressing lightly against your skin. Oddly, the tightness is calming rather than confining, as if the castle itself is guiding you deeper into its heart, whispering stories that only the patient and observant can hear. Scholars still debate the psychological impact of these designs, but tonight the corridor carries you forward with serene, quiet insistence. Finally, as you reach the end of the passage, the corridor opens slightly, hinting at another chamber beyond. Oddly, the soft echo of your footsteps has slowed, matched by the gentle rhythm of dripping water somewhere nearby. Scholars still argue whether these acoustic effects were deliberate or accidental, but tonight they become the lullaby of stone, carrying you further into the castle's hidden, timeless world. The chamber you enter is darker than those before, yet somehow it feels more alive. The air is cooler, carrying a faint metallic scent mixed with damp stone and the subtle aroma of moss that has claimed the walls over centuries. You probably won't survive the first few steps without imagining the shadows moving independently, but instead of fear, you feel a sleepy curiosity, drawn forward by the rhythm of your own breathing. The floor here is uneven, stones jagged in places, smooth in others, worn by countless feet over the centuries. Oddly, the pattern of wear forms faint lines that guide your steps almost instinctively. Scholars still debate whether these grooves were accidental or intentional, perhaps indicating secret pathways, or simply the result of long use. Yet tonight, they feel like gentle instructions, easing your passage through the darkness. Near the far wall, a shallow recess holds remnants of pottery, brittle and dusty. Oddly, one fragment glimmers faintly, catching your torchlight as if winking at you. Scholars still argue whether pottery was purely utilitarian or also carried symbolic significance, but the tiny reflection feels like a wink from the past, reminding you that someone long ago moved carefully through these same stones. The ceiling here dips low, forcing you to bow slightly. Oddly, faint carvings of arches and lines trace along the stones above, creating a subtle rhythm that your eyes follow almost hypnotically. Scholars still debate whether these carvings were purely decorative, mnemonic devices, or markers of spiritual significance. But tonight, they lull your mind into a steady, relaxed cadence. Along one side, a narrow slit allows a shard of moonlight to cut through the darkness. Oddly, it illuminates a portion of the floor where faint footprints have been etched into the stone, worn almost smooth with age. Scholars still argue whether these marks were deliberate paths, ritual gestures, or mere accidents. But tonight, they guide you like a quiet hand, showing the way forward without words. A rusted iron door set into the corner wall creaks softly as you push it open, revealing another short corridor. Oddly, the sound of the hinges resonates in a musical echo, almost like a whispered greeting from the castle itself. Scholars still debate whether medieval builders understood and utilized acoustics in such passages, but tonight the faint music feels like a soft invitation deeper into history. The corridor slopes downward slightly, carrying you into cooler, damper air. Oddly, the moisture clings to your skin, but instead of discomfort, it is soothing, like a gentle, invisible weight pressing you into calm awareness. Scholars still argue whether such underground designs were practical, psychological, or both, but tonight it serves purely to cradle your senses and slow your racing thoughts. On the floor, you notice scattered remnants of rope and broken wood, perhaps from long-abandoned ladders or support beams. Oddly, the arrangement of debris forms patterns in the torchlight, almost like an unintentional mosaic. Scholars still debate whether accidental formations like this were meaningful, but tonight it acts as a quiet, meditative puzzle, drawing your eyes and thoughts into gentle focus. As you reach the end of this corridor, a faint sound reaches you, the dripping of water somewhere beyond. Oddly, it seems distant, but rhythmic, each drop a tiny, deliberate pulse that syncs with your breathing. Scholars still argue whether natural acoustics were ever considered by builders, but tonight it becomes your hypnotic guide, carrying you softly forward. Finally, a larger doorway opens ahead, faintly lit by moonlight spilling from a hidden shaft above. Oddly, the light lands directly on a small pile of stones, arranged almost deliberately. Scholars still debate whether such formations were markers, protection, or simply remnants of collapse. But tonight, they feel like stepping stones in time, leading you further into the castle's quiet, watchful heart. You step through the larger doorway and find yourself in a slightly more expansive chamber. The ceiling rises higher here, arched in rough stone, and the torchlight flickers across walls mottled with damp streaks and faint mineral deposits. You probably won't survive this moment without imagining centuries of unseen visitors brushing past, whispering in the dark. But instead of fear, you feel an intimate connection, as if the castle has been waiting for your presence. The floor is uneven, worn smooth along a faint path that seems to invite exploration. Oddly, a series of shallow grooves trace across one side, as if someone once dragged something heavy through the space. Scholars still debate whether such wear marks indicate practical use, ritualistic practices, or simple accident. But tonight, the path feels like a silent guide, leading you toward the secrets hidden deeper in the stone. Near the far wall, a pile of broken pottery rests, some pieces stacked haphazardly, others scattered as though dropped in haste. Oddly, one shard still holds a hint of glaze, shimmering faintly in the torchlight. Scholars still argue whether such remnants were utilitarian or ceremonial, but the glint feels like a playful wink from the past, coaxing your attention and imagination. A narrow recess in the wall contains remnants of rope, frayed and brittle with age. Oddly, the coils suggest careful storage, almost like someone left them intentionally to mark a spot. Scholars still debate whether such arrangements served practical or symbolic purposes, but tonight it feels like a quiet signpost, showing you where to pause, breathe, and notice. The chamber slopes slightly downward toward a low archway at the far end. Oddly, the torchlight catches tiny carvings along the stones of the arch, spirals, dots, and lines, forming a rhythm you can't name. Scholars still argue whether these were functional markers or decorative flourishes, but tracing them with your eyes, slows your thoughts, creating a hypnotic, sleepy cadence. As you step closer to the archway, the faint sound of dripping water grows more distinct. Oddly, the echoes bounce across the chamber in overlapping layers, producing a soft symphony of sound. Scholars still debate whether medieval builders considered acoustics in such chambers, but tonight it becomes a meditative rhythm, carrying your attention gently forward. Along one wall, faint carvings trace out abstract shapes, lines that seem to interlock in intricate patterns. Oddly, your eyes keep returning to a single spiral motif that seems slightly deeper than the rest, almost pulsating in the torchlight. Scholars still argue whether such patterns had symbolic, instructional, or ritual meaning, but tonight they are a lullaby in stone, coaxing your mind toward calm. You notice a small rusted iron hook embedded in the wall, possibly once used to hang a lantern. Oddly, it catches the light just so, casting a tiny shadow that resembles a bird in flight. Scholars still debate whether these hooks and their incidental shadows were noticed or meaningful. But tonight, the playful image invites a gentle smile, a quiet pause in your wandering. The archway at the far end leads into a short corridor sloping downward. Oddly, the narrowing passage feels protective, almost like a gentle embrace guiding you along. Scholars still argue whether medieval tunnels were practical, psychological, or both, but tonight it is entirely comforting, carrying your imagination and your drowsy attention deeper into the castle's hidden heart. Finally, as you step into the corridor, the dripping water echoes softly behind you, fading into a rhythmic hum. Oddly, the sound blends with your own breathing, creating a soothing, hypnotic melody. Scholars still debate whether these acoustic phenomena were intentional or incidental, but tonight they form the perfect lullaby, carrying you gently toward the next secret waiting to be discovered. The corridor opens into a chamber that feels colder than any you've encountered so far. The air is crisp and carries the faint metallic scent of old stone, mingled with the subtle dampness of hidden underground streams. You probably won't survive this space without imagining spectral figures lingering in the corners. But instead of fear, there's a hushed reverence, as if you stumbled into a sanctuary forgotten by time. The floor is uneven, worn in places smooth by repeated footsteps, jagged in others where centuries of debris have settled. Oddly, the stones here seem to guide your steps naturally, as though the chamber has been subtly shaped to cradle movement. Scholars still debate whether such wear patterns were intentional or incidental, but tonight they lead you onward with an almost hypnotic certainty. Along one wall, a series of niches rise in uneven tiers, some empty, others holding faint remnants of clay and ash. Oddly, one niche contains a small, hardened lump that resembles a tiny loaf of bread, preserved by the cool, dry air. Scholars still argue whether these were offerings, storage, or simple debris, but the effect is uncanny, a quiet reminder of daily life mingling with centuries of silence. Near the center of the chamber, a shallow basin carved from stone catches a glint of torchlight. Water rests in its depression, perfectly still except for the occasional drip from the ceiling. Oddly, the ripples catch the light and scatter it across the walls in faint dancing patterns. Scholars still debate whether medieval builders noticed such reflective effects, but tonight they form a hypnotic spectacle, soothing your mind as your gaze follows the gentle shimmer. The walls themselves bear faint carvings, lines, spirals, and small dots forming an intricate, almost musical rhythm. Oddly, one spiral motif seems slightly deeper, pulsating subtly as your torchlight moves. Scholars still argue whether these marks were functional, decorative, or symbolic, but tracing them with your eyes slows your heartbeat and deepens your drowsy focus. A narrow slit near the ceiling lets in a faint shaft of moonlight. Oddly, it lands directly on a section of the floor where the stone is worn smooth, almost polished by centuries of footsteps. Scholars still argue whether such windows served practical, symbolic, or defensive purposes, but tonight the gentle illumination is like a spotlight from the past, guiding your eyes and mind naturally forward. In one corner, a rusted iron hook protrudes from the wall, likely a remnant of a lantern or other hanging object. Oddly, the shadow it casts resembles a delicate winged creature in mid-flight. Scholars still argue whether such incidental shapes held meaning, but tonight it sparks a quiet curiosity, inviting your imagination to wander without pressure or expectation. The chamber slopes downward toward a low archway, the stones narrowing slightly as if ushering you into a more intimate space. Oddly, the walls seem to press lightly against you, protective rather than confining. Scholars still debate whether tunnel dimensions were strategic or psychological, but tonight it feels like a gentle guide, encouraging your journey through the castle's secrets. As you approach the archway, the faint sound of dripping water becomes a soft, steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat echoing through stone. Oddly, it synchronizes with your own breathing, creating a hypnotic lullaby that carries you onward. Scholars still argue whether these acoustic effects were deliberate or incidental, but tonight they become the perfect accompaniment to your quiet exploration, a timeless pulse that draws you gently into deeper history. Finally, stepping through the archway, you feel the chamber's embrace fade behind you, replaced by a narrow passage bathed in shadow. Oddly, the darkness seems alive, inviting rather than intimidating. Scholars still debate whether underground corridors were designed for function or psychological impact, but tonight it feels like a warm, slow current guiding you to the next layer of hidden stories waiting in the castle's heart. The narrow passage slopes gently downward, and the air grows cooler, tinged with a damp, mineral-rich scent that makes you inhale deeply without realizing it. You probably won't survive this part without imagining centuries of forgotten footsteps echoing around you, but instead of fear, you feel a calm curiosity, like a child discovering a secret for the first time. The floor is uneven, scattered with small stones and fine dust. Oddly, some stones appear polished, worn smooth by repeated passage over centuries. Scholars still debate whether these grooves were accidental or deliberate markers, but your feet follow them instinctively, each step carrying you deeper into the castle's hidden veins. Along the walls, faint carvings catch your torchlight. Spirals, dots, and interlocking lines form abstract patterns, almost like a secret language. Oddly, one sequence seems to pulse faintly under your gaze, drawing your eyes along its curves. Scholars still argue whether such markings were symbolic, decorative, or purely accidental, but tonight they hypnotize your attention, easing you into a drowsy trance. Halfway down the passage, you encounter a shallow alcove. Oddly, a rusted hook and traces of wax cling to the stone, as though a candle once burned here for a specific purpose. Scholars still debate whether these niches were functional, ceremonial, or both. But for you, the remnants create a quiet story, a whisper of daily life persisting through centuries of silence. The passage curves gently, narrowing slightly. Oddly, the walls seem to guide you forward, pressing lightly in a comforting rhythm. Scholars still argue whether the psychological effects of narrow corridors were intentional, but tonight The subtle embrace slows your heartbeat, carrying you along without conscious effort. A soft, rhythmic drip echoes from somewhere ahead, bouncing off the walls in overlapping layers. Oddly, the sound mimics a heartbeat, slow and steady, synchronizing with your breathing. Scholars still debate whether medieval builders considered acoustics or whether it was coincidence, but tonight the echoes lull you, creating a gentle rhythm that keeps your mind comfortably adrift. The ceiling dips slightly, and you notice faint mineral formations resembling tiny stalactites. Oddly, one formation curls delicately, casting a shadow like a miniature spiral staircase against the wall. Scholars still argue whether such natural formations were noticed or held symbolic meaning, but tonight the shape draws your eyes and imagination, a quiet marvel in the dim light. Near the end of the passage, a small slit lets in a faint shaft of moonlight. Oddly, it illuminates a tiny section of floor polished by centuries of footsteps, highlighting the natural patterns in the stone. Scholars still debate whether such lighting effects were accidental or intentional, but tonight it feels like a gentle guidepost, showing the way forward with soft clarity. Finally, the passage opens into a slightly larger chamber. Oddly, the faint smell of moss mixes with the metallic scent of stone, creating a strangely calming atmosphere. Scholars still argue whether underground chambers were purely functional or designed to evoke certain feelings. But tonight, the room wraps around you like a quiet embrace, carrying your imagination toward the final secrets waiting in the castle's hidden heart. The final chamber you enter feels different from all the others. A quiet majesty lingers in the stone. The ceiling rises higher, arching gracefully above your head, while the walls are smoother, worn by centuries of time and perhaps reverence. You probably won't survive this moment without imagining long-forgotten ceremonies or whispered secrets. But instead of fear, there's a sense of gentle culmination, like the castle itself is sharing its last, most intimate story. The floor is a patchwork of smooth and rough stones. Oddly, some stones bear faint carvings, spirals, dots, and intersecting lines that seem to form a subtle map of the castle itself. Scholars still debate whether these markings were practical, symbolic, or decorative, but tonight, tracing them with your eyes feels like reading the heartbeat of the structure, a silent guide through centuries of history. Along one wall, a recessed alcove holds remnants of clay jars, shards of pottery, and traces of hardened wax. Oddly, one jar tilts slightly, as if nudged by an unseen hand, casting a delicate shadow across the wall. Scholars still argue whether these alcoves were ritualistic or utilitarian, but the scene carries a quiet, almost playful intimacy, as if someone long gone is quietly acknowledging your presence. Near the center of the chamber, a stone basin rests, filled with still water. Oddly, the surface reflects the faint torchlight, fractured into gentle patterns that shimmer across the ceiling. Scholars still debate whether such reflective effects were noticed or valued, but tonight they create a mesmerizing, hypnotic effect, drawing your eyes and mind into a calm, almost meditative focus. The walls themselves are etched with subtle motifs, small spirals, geometric shapes, and faint lines. Oddly, one spiral seems to pulse faintly as your gaze lingers, hypnotic and soothing. Scholars still argue whether these carvings were purely symbolic, instructional, or decorative, but tracing them quietly slows your thoughts. A soft rhythm, that feels like the castle breathing alongside you. A narrow slit near the ceiling allows a delicate stream of moonlight to fall across the chamber, illuminating the worn stones with a silvery glow. Oddly, the light seems to highlight the path you've taken through the castle, a gentle trail connecting all the chambers, corridors, and hidden passages you've explored. Scholars still debate whether light placement was intentional or accidental, but tonight it feels purposeful, a soft guiding hand. Near the far corner, a rusted iron hook juts from the wall, its shadow resembling a bird frozen mid-flight. Oddly, the silhouette seems almost alive, fluttering as your torch moves. Scholars still argue whether such incidental forms carried meaning, but tonight it sparks a quiet smile, a playful reminder that even the smallest details in history can whisper stories. The chamber slopes slightly toward a narrow exit, and the faint sound of dripping water grows distant behind you. Oddly, the echo of your own footsteps blends with the rhythm of the castle's hidden streams, creating a gentle harmony. Scholars still debate whether these effects were intentional or incidental, but tonight it becomes a lullaby, guiding you toward closure. As you take your final steps through the exit, the quiet majesty of the chamber lingers in your mind. Oddly, the scent of moss and damp stone stays with you, a soft memory imprinted on your senses. Scholars still argue whether the psychological impact of such spaces was deliberate, but tonight it simply soothes, leaving you with the serene impression of a castle that has shared its secrets without hurry or judgment. Finally, as you step into the faint light beyond, the entire labyrinth of corridors, chambers, and hidden alcoves seems to fold behind you, a soft, protective archive of history that only you have wandered. Oddly, the quiet and calm linger in your mind, a gentle reminder that the stories of stone and shadow can soothe as easily as they mystify. Scholars still argue whether these spaces were designed for awe, function, or secrecy, but tonight their effect is singular, peaceful, hypnotic, and perfect for drifting toward dreams. You pause outside the final chamber, letting your gaze linger on the castle's silhouette as moonlight washes over the stone. The corridors, the hidden alcoves, the whispering chambers, they are all imprinted in your memory now, a quiet map of centuries. You probably won't survive this feeling without imagining the countless unseen lives, the hands that carved each notch, the shadows that stretched across these walls. But instead of fear, there's a deep, gentle calm. Breathe slowly. The scent of damp stone and faint moss clings to the air, softening your senses. Your footsteps echo faintly behind you, a gentle rhythm that synchronizes with your heartbeat. Oddly, even the silence carries warmth, a hushed melody that travels along your spine. Scholars might argue whether these spaces were designed for impact or incidental effect, but tonight they are your lullaby, a serenade in stone and shadow. Look around. The moonlight catches the edges of the walls, illuminating faint carvings, worn paths, and tiny relics left untouched for centuries. Oddly, each detail, the spiral motif, the shimmering water, the faint echo of dripping, creates a gentle cadence that drifts through your mind like soft waves. Scholars still debate the purpose of such chambers, but you don't need an answer. Their quiet beauty is enough. Let your shoulders relax. Let your eyes soften. The labyrinth of the castle folds gently into memory, leaving only calm. Oddly, the sensation is like being tucked into a warm blanket, wrapped in centuries of silent stories. Scholars may still argue about intent and function, but tonight, you simply feel the quiet embrace of history. Now, dim the lights in your room. Let the gentle rhythm of stone, shadow, and water guide your thoughts into softness. Listen to the whispers of the castle one last time as you exhale, drifting ever gently toward dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.